I made a conscious effort to have conversations in Latin with people, and that was scary at first, but it got easier the more I did it. So it was, I don't know how to explain it other than you've got to step out and try. If it's something that you love, if the language is one that you find personally very enjoyable, then you should lean into that and make all the uses of the language as enjoyable to you as possible.
Hi, Carla.
Hello, Alvaro.
And well, welcome to the podcast. First of all, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here.
And before we get started, just a little menu of the day, or where we're gonna talk about. So we're gonna talk about your language background, your experience as a Latin teacher. We'll talk about the transition between input and output, what skills are necessary or required. Super interesting. I think we're going to talk about how you train yourself to produce output in Latin. I think that part is going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
We'll talk about your 2 books, to help people learn Latin through stories.
Yeah, one of them's published. Another one's in progress at the moment, so that's exciting.
Perfect. And much more, of course. So that's the menu for today. And why don't you get started by telling us a little bit about yourself, your language background?
Yes. Well, before I get into the language background, sorry if there may have been groans on the audio before, but I'm joined with my young son Ezekiel. And he's about 9 weeks old right now. He doesn't yet know his first language. He's just really special, but very, very needy. So I'm really glad to be here and talking and doing something other than just caring for him for a little bit. But he will interrupt this, I'm sure.
Lovely. No worries.
Yeah. So I am Australian, and one thing about being Australian is it's really hard to not be just a monolingual English speaker in Australia. And I think the large part of that is simply because with immigration in Australia, it's not all from one source, it's all from everywhere. And so it's hard to get pockets of language-speaking communities where a single second language is a shared language for many people. With the exception of perhaps some major languages like Mandarin Chinese, which makes me feel kind of a little bit guilty because my family's language background is Mandarin Chinese and various other dialects or languages of the Chinese varieties. So my mom knows 5 languages. And I'm natively only competent in one, English. My mother is Malaysian Chinese, and she knows English, Bahasa Malaysian. She knows Cantonese, Hokkien, and Mandarin Chinese. So quite a variety there. I think she actually acquired Bahasa Malaysian. She told me that she just decided to learn it one day and continued speaking it. Like, she doesn't remember how she learned Bahasa Malaysian because that's not something that her family directly spoke to her, but it was very common in the area that she was living in as a child. So you could always find speakers right around the corner in the marketplace speaking Bahasa Malaysian. So yeah, there's a lot of incentive to learn languages in a place where everyone's speaking all these languages all the time. And in Australia, it seems to be a much more of you learn languages when you go to school and you learn them not super well, and it's really hard. and then you graduate from school, you kind of sigh of relief, and you just get on with your life. And maybe if you're really interested in one language, you might pursue it a little bit longer. But most people don't have a very high success rate of learning languages.
Right.
Which is a bit of a shame. This is a lovely journey. So what I found with languages is I took Latin in high school and I loved it. I found it easier than Chinese because I could easily look things up in the dictionary. And as silly as that is, because like with Chinese, if you have to look something up in the dictionary, it's a long process.
Right.
Finding the radical and counting the number of strokes in it, and then looking it up in a table at the start of the dictionary. And then you get the pinyin. Then you can look up the pinyin. Oh, goodness. But with Latin, it's alphabetical. The dictionary is alphabetical, so it's easy. I mean, the dictionary is alphabetical in Mandarin Chinese as well, but just extra step. So I found Latin in school kind of refreshing in that sense, and there was no pressure to be already good at it because I had no background in it, and no one has a background in Latin. We're all second language. No one has like a bunch of relatives that they can talk to in that language.
Right.
Yeah. But I found Latin also really interesting because of the things that are written in it. Ancient texts that are like poetry from 2,000 years ago about a mythical founding figure who may or may not be praising the emperor of the time when it was written, linked to stories of the fall of Troy, but also kind of warped by Roman propaganda, like things like that in the text that we're reading. There's always the joke where in modern languages you learn, where is the bathroom? How are you? I want to pay only $5 for this, stuff like that. And then in Latin, you learn kill, destroy, conquer, that kind of thing. The rations would only last for 20 days for the whole army, and blah, 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 that kind of thing. There's a different tone to language learning, a different purpose as well. So that was it. It did kind of appeal, and the more I did things with Latin, the more I enjoyed Latin. So it just turned out that I continued learning Latin. When I was in university, I gradually came to realize the more that you learn Latin, the more you wish you already knew ancient Greek.
Okay.
So I took up ancient Greek, and I'm very glad I did, because with ancient Greek you can read all kinds of very good things, like the New Testament in ancient Greek, in a very easy form of ancient Greek, and just so many wonderful works of ancient the works of antiquity in Latin are so very often inspired by similar works in ancient Greek. And it's just wonderful to see how that the ancient Greek culture affects the Roman culture, and the sense of what is aesthetic and beautiful in literature, in Roman literature, Latin literature. So then I learnt ancient Greek in university. Ancient Greek was taught much more like using the grammar translation method, whereas in high school, Latin was sort of taught through reading and grammar translation. It was like you'd get lots of connected text in stories with Latin, and it went over several years, whereas with ancient Greek, it was very much like, we're in a rush. Here are all the grammar rules. Here's some vocab to memorize. Now go and start translating ancient texts. That was kind of a bit jarring.
And it wasn't very enjoyable, right?
The process itself,
that approach,
the approach itself wouldn't have been enjoyable, except that I was very motivated. So, and also it felt very like because I'd had a flavor of grammar translation in Latin, it felt like I knew what to do. It may not be enjoyable, but I could get through it. And I wonder how many people studying ancient Greek feel a similar way. It's almost like ancient Greek is taught to people who already know Latin and have all those biases with how language should be learned. And like they've laid down what the nominative case and the accusative and all those cases. Just transfer it into ancient Greek and you're done. It felt like ancient Greek was Latin, but with a different alphabet and different vocab for at least the first half of it. And then the second half, it was like, oh, all these grammar rules that don't fit with the Latin grammar rules, they're all coming into play now.
No, really interesting.
Yeah.
What was it back then that you decided to become a teacher because you loved it so much? Like you loved the process so much, or?
Yeah, I did. I started thinking about being a teacher actually when I was getting close to the end of high school. Sorry for the grunting here. And also as I was going through university, thinking about it as well. It's fun being a teacher because you get to I get to talk to people and I get to explain things or just use direct interaction with people to teach people things. And I find that so much fun compared to writing, the process of writing and thinking about something and overthinking things and editing and all that. Yeah. So all of the professions that kind of open up to you about from knowing Latin, most of them in the academic pathway did not appeal to me, but teaching certainly did.
Cool. And I'm really curious about your journey as a teacher because, I mean, the way languages are taught for the most part is the grammar translation method, like you said. But Latin is, it's like my parents took Latin, for example, in high school, I think, and a lot of people. But for Latin, it was even more based on translation for the most part. I mean, like, because it's
almost like the definition. Right? Yeah, it's like the definition of older Latin pedagogy was grammar translation method.
Right. So
it's it seems to be that the modern language, the people who were into modern language teaching were the ones who pushed for anything else other than grammar translation. And they went through so many different methods and styles of teaching. And I'm sure to people who, a lot of the people who are into grammar translation all call them fads because like they went through different stages of what kind of things would be good alternatives to grammar translation. Right. But every single time they're all like, but at least it's better than grammar translation.
Right. So yeah, I'm really curious about your journey. Like, when you started out as a teacher, did you use that method, but then realize that you went to do something different, or how was it?
Yeah, I started out being pretty similar, like having a similar teaching style to how I was taught, which is a mixture of reading and grammar translation. Right. So we would have lots of readings from the Cambridge Latin course is what I learned from. And then there'd be grammar explanations paired with that. So what my habit was to teach the grammar item first and be like, okay, in this chapter, in this story, we're going to have this item come up and this is what it means. Copy down this table, memorize this thing, and now we'll do the reading together and like enjoy that. Translate that reading, stuff like that. And half the time they were copying each other in the translation, but it's a bit hard to get around that. So I started out teaching from the Cambridge Latin course, and then I changed schools and taught from the Oxford Latin course because that was what the other school, my current school, had. And just kind of continued in that vein of like pre-teach the grammar, and then as you get time, like it's good to practice the grammar in translating a story and having those longer passages. Whereas now I've got a different kind of more of a flipped approach. Like it's better to encounter grammar in context, if at all possible, and to have the context explain what the feature means and try to make things as self-explanatory as possible, and to give as much exposure to the target features, if there is a target feature, to basically flood that with input as much as possible and make the barrier to entry of how easy it is to understand these examples, make that as low as possible so that you can get as many repetitions in that are meaningful. But that was a really big switch that I kind of dove into about mid-2021. It was because I stumbled upon a bunch of YouTube videos, actually. It was things like Luc Ranieri's channel, Scorpio Martianus, and he was recommending Alpha with Angela, which was a Hebrew course. And now I had done a bit of beginner Hebrew myself a couple years before that, and I'd kind of self-taught, found a bunch of grammar translation videos online and taught myself beginner Hebrew. Didn't really get super far because it is quite difficult to learn any language through grammar translation. And I hadn't really practiced a whole lot while I was busy teaching. But then discovering Alpha with Angela's videos. Sorry, not Alpha with Angela. I said the wrong one. It was Aleph with Beth.
Yeah.
Aleph with Beth, of course. Aleph with Beth is the Hebrew version, where they teach Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, with comprehensible input kind of approach, with lots of little toy animals. There was a lot of TPR in that.
Yep.
And it was just so night and day different from my experiences with learning the both Latin and ancient Greek through mostly grammar translation method, although Latin, I would argue, had a fair amount of input and was kind of a lot more pleasant. But it was so different. I felt like I had to immediately redesign all my curriculum to reflect like comprehensible input is so much more accessible, so much more wired to the way that my brain wants to learn. I'd be nuts not to teach in mostly a comprehensible input way.
You were like, what am I doing here, right?
yeah, exactly. It was like, why have I been like redesigning all my curriculum materials around grammar translation when I should be doing it the opposite way? So yeah, that is a thing that is a very common habit of language teaching, is you get given a textbook, and of course there's always going to be gaps in a textbook, and there's always going to be things that you realize your children, your students need more practice for, or there's a gap in their understanding. So you make supplementary materials. And then so when people have been trained mostly in grammar translation, you make supplements that are mostly drills and tables and memorize and do this and that, very like repetitious kind of things. They're also easier to design. It's harder to write a bonus story or something. There's a lot more creative effort. So through the course of adapting the Oxford Latin course to my students up to that point, I did feel like I was making it more grammar-y. Okay. And there's a common experience among Latin teachers that as they get given stuff like the Cambridge Latin course, they fix it by making it more grammar-y. And it's very difficult to fix it by making it less grammar-y, or not less grammar-y, but like more story-focused, more long form, like having more connected speech, connected, meaningful utterances. So yeah, it was a really big shift that I needed to do. I kind of had to scrap most of the stuff I'd made in the previous years and make a whole bunch of stuff that was pushing it in the other direction. And I think this kind of approach of like, don't throw away your textbook, just make it better is probably a really good piece of advice I would give to fellow teachers of any language. If you can reuse some good bits from your curriculum, absolutely do that, because I think the bare bones of the of most textbooks, most courses are sound, and like there's usually a reason why it was structured a certain way. There's usually good topic focuses in the textbooks, and it's just make it relevant, make it enjoyable, make it communicative for your students.
Right.
Fix it, adapt it, don't completely throw it out.
Right.
But even trying to adapt it was quite a lot of work. 2022, and I kind of nearly burnt out. But 2023, I had all this materials, and 2024, I was basically reusing everything. So it was nice. It was like I should have spaced it out a bit more.
Okay.
Don't try to redesign all the year levels at the same time. Is the other piece of advice I'd say.
Cool. Well, I mean, I'm thinking that the thing that I'm extremely curious about is, in your case, in your classes, or in any teacher's Latin classes, is there any oral input, or how do you go about it? Because, I mean, I have traditional classes in mind, as you talked about, like reading, translating, and things like that. But, like, do you even... Because we're going to talk about how you train yourself through output in Latin, which is super interesting. But I'm curious about that part when it comes to Latin. Like, do you teach, like, is there oral input in the classroom, or how's that part?
I do provide oral input. Now, the thing is that as language teachers, we do need to follow curriculum. In my case, the state curriculum, right. And therefore, like, the assessment tasks will be sort of skewed towards whatever gets assessed in the final exam. Mm-hmm. There is no oral component in the final exam in Latin. That is part of the reason why some students choose Latin as a language, because they are nervous about orals and speaking and things like that. Right. But I do incorporate listening comprehension at year 9 and 10 level, even though it's not reflected in the VCE, that is the year 11 and 12 curriculum that is set, where the assessments are set by the state. Or sort of like in year 11, it's just the type of assessment is set, but the teacher design it all. In year 12, there is a final exam that is externally assessed, which is purely written, and it's purely going from Latin into English. Like the student is not writing any Latin in their Latin exam in my state, just translating and responding. So things like comprehension, knowledge of context, and there's even a kind of essay response to a text prompt as well. But also, like, there's an unseen translation passage, which is accounting for almost half the marks in the exam. So I set listening comprehension in year 9 and 10 because I want students to have that skill to be able to digest the sentence from the perspective of a listener who can only hear it like one word in sequence. When we read Latin, often it is taught that you like hunt around the sentence and find the verb, then find the subject, find the direct object, and put it all together like a jigsaw puzzle. And all of that is kind of impossible if you're listening to a sentence. Like you have to engage with the information in real time.
Yeah, you don't
even
time.
if
Right.
Yeah. Even if I repeat the story 3 or 4 times aloud, you can't actually like zoom out, hunt and peck for the verb, the subject, right. The object that way. And that's the way that the Romans digested the sentence, right? It's not like they were going to like look at this sentence that was written down and be like, all right, Cicero, I'm going to find your verb.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, this is a dependent clause. Okay, I can bracket that off. Like, no, they would have heard the information in chunks. They would maybe digested the chunks together. All of the first three words, there's a chunk, and then there's the next four words, there's another chunk. They may be all dependent clauses until the very last chunk, which is the main clause, but usually the information given in a sentence makes sense in that order as well. Like if it's a story, the early parts of the sentence are earlier in the story than the last part of the sentence, and things like that. It may not be structured the way an English sentence would be structured, but it would make sense.
But for them, it was quote unquote the normal language, right? That they use in and when you use a language, you don't focus on form, you focus on meaning, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like when you speak in English, we're doing right, your native language, you want to communicate. You don't, like you said, you're not paying attention to, so here's the verb, here's the object. That'd be crazy, right?
Yeah. The unfortunate thing about Latin is that with that unseen translation passage in the final exam, it is very hard not to get very lost if you don't know what the forms mean. So much of the information in Latin is caught up in the endings of words, such that, like, for example, whether something's a subject or object or receiving another object is coded in those forms. So the forms, I do believe, have the same amount of meaning as a lot of words would in a language like English, where, like you'd be taught what kind of things like the versus a mean in English, which doesn't exist in Latin. That kind of distinction doesn't exist. But Latin has distinctions that don't exist or aren't marked that same way in English. And I think knowledge of the grammar is actually essential for getting anything other than a very low mark at that unseen translation task, which is a bit unfortunate. But that's what I'm teaching for.
Right.
I have to prepare them for that. But at the very least, can I prepare them for that in a way that feels to me authentic and feels to me that they can see that language is structured for meaning, that they are those sentences that the authors, like this will be from a very lightly adapted from a real Latin author who was writing for a native speaking audience and an educated native speaking audience at that, that he's not trying to test them. The original author is not trying to be tricky. He's just saying it the way that it makes the most sense to a Roman, Latin educated audience.
Yeah, communicating a message, right? That's
exactly
what he was doing.
Yeah. So that's part of why I do set listening comprehension among other types of assessment. And the other part of the reason why I set listening comprehension is because it means that they get a lot of input during a test. Because I'll be reading the same story aloud 3 times and asking them that they've got a sheet of paper in front of them with questions in English where they answer in English, because that's a method of testing so that you know that they're not just mindlessly copying down a word without knowing it. Yeah. But they're responding in English to the listening, the input in Latin, and during the course of a test, they get a lot of repeated input where they're very motivated to try to listen. That's the other reason why I do that. Sometimes, tests take up a lot of time in your course, and it really does feel like I get robbed of actual teaching time when I have too many assessments to do.
Right. But there you're taking for comprehension, right? You're using English, but you just want to know that they understand what you're talking about.
Exactly. It's comprehension level type things. So I think that skill is especially important in Latin, where it's mostly it's a language where the main focus for most people is in reading ancient texts and not in producing modern works of art, which is a bit of a shame. but it is the way that the curriculum is set up in my state, and there is no Latin written in the exam. So I will not get any benefit out of teaching my students to compose in Latin, which is a bit of a shame as well. But it's what I've got. And if I can inspire my students a love of the language, a lot of the time they come to me at the end of year 12, like writing me a card or something, and they try their best to write it all in Latin, all their thanks and things like that. And I always, it melts my heart. I see that it's full of errors, but it melts my heart. It doesn't matter in that context. It is really just, I see that they love this language, and it has helped them on their journey to kind of discover more about the world.
Yeah, they feel like trying, so that means you did something right.
Yeah, exactly. They feel safe.
Yeah,
they feel safe writing to their Latin teacher in Latin.
Exactly. Yeah, now it'd be interesting how much I could understand, like as a native Spanish speaker, if that'd be easier for me or for, someone from Italy or France.
Yes, absolutely. You would find it a lot easier to understand Latin. There are separate languages. They do have very different grammars, but so much of the language is in the words. It's in those what do you call it? The lexemes. It's the dictionary. That's why the dictionary is so much longer than a grammar. Right. It contains so much more information than a grammar book does.
So it's like those cases, like in Slavic languages, for example?
Yes, they behave like that. Okay. Yeah.
Right. All right, so now let's get to I was going to say the mind-blowing part, but now, because I want to talk about the transition between input and output. I'm interested to know what your case with Latin, because I know you train yourself to do it in Latin. Because I'm talking about this part a lot recently because I realized that there's something missing there. Comprehensible input is the most important thing to me in order to learn a language. But, I think this doesn't get talked about enough. Like, how do you make that transition between input and output? Because, well, I'm curious to know about your Latin experience, but for the most part, with modern languages, our goal is to be able to communicate in the language, right? So that I believe that's a part we should be talking more about, right? But I'm super interested to know, like, how you train yourself to produce output in Latin.
Yeah. Well, when I was in school, there was one assessment task in year 11 in the state curriculum, which was translate sentences from English into Latin. In all the textbooks, this is called Latin prose composition, but it is only in the form of, here's an English sentence, now turn it into the Latin.
That's output, in a way.
Yeah, that was the output. That was the output that I was exposed to in my schooling. Since then, the curriculum has been streamlined and the English to Latin translation has been taken out. They say you can still teach it. It's just, it's up to you as a teacher to do that. If you think that it's so important for people to be able to translate from Latin to English, then teach English to Latin as well. If you think that it's helpful for both them to do both ways. But it's not part of the state curriculum. It was never part of the year 12 exam. But the fact that it was in year 11 did tend to make people focus on it in the earlier years leading up to it. So I did translate into Latin and get a whole lot of red marks. It was you'd get lots of corrections on that kind of exercise because there was one correct answer or like very few, maybe 2 or 3 correct answers, but they have to have every word correct. Like there's every adjective has a noun that it has to agree with in number, gender, and case. And it's so hard to just keep remembering, oh yeah, I got to keep that the same gender as what it's agreeing with, and what is the gender of this?
Right. And it's written. It's written, so you do have more time to think about it. It's not like real communication, like in a modern language. Then but
exactly. So I was thinking, I used to tutor as well back when it was in the curriculum, and a set of maybe 6 to 10 sentences, good number of sentences where it's like maybe there's a main clause and a dependent clause, like not just a really short sentence, but 6 to 10 decent length sentences would take a whole tutoring session of about roughly an hour to go through and to correct and to like explain why it should be that way and not that way. So like imagine only producing about 6 to 10 sentences in a lesson. There's a lot of I guess that's the theme of Latin, is like a lot of work on a very small amount of text.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's like traditional language learning on asteroids, right? It's like,
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah. But it was about precision. It was so much more about accuracy than about fluency.
Right.
Because even when there was that kind of output in the curriculum, no one was expecting anyone to start talking in Latin, to just like open their mouth and declaim like Cicero or something like that, or even just talk as a normal person.
Right.
And I think there is there is room for correction to be part of an instruction. I think there can be good correction, even in the form of rephrasing what the student said.
Right.
And I would go a little bit harsher and say, I think sometimes cracking out the red pen and being like, okay, let's this is what would happen if the whole sentence was now correct.
Right.
But do it with like anonymized student responses or something. Like don't put any student on the spot or make them feel like they're the one singled out. Be like, here's 5 sentences, each from 5 different students. They're all doing about the same, so don't feel like you're particularly the most not competent in this.
Right.
Learners aren't very competent in general. It's very, that's why they're learning.
Right. Yeah, but it also depends on what your goal is. Meaning, if you're preparing them for a test, it makes more sense to even get to the red mark, like you said, right?
Yeah.
If communication is the goal, which is or should be for modern languages for the most part, that's a bit of a different dynamic.
It's a different thing. It's like people are more forgiving, I think, of mistakes in a second language speaker of modern language when you're just trying to get something done other than be correct in your language.
Right.
But almost any time that you use that you produce in Latin, having correctness in the output is part of the goal. Like a lot of the thing that like Latin is used today for communicating in formal settings. Things like writing books in Latin, making works of art in Latin. A lot of this is about the performance wants to be fairly polished. Either it's an educational resource or it's a something beautiful. And there are also forums in which you can use Latin in a more casual setting, conversations among friends, conversations among speaking groups. Absolutely, I think that Latin doesn't have to be massively polished when you're just talking to someone. But because there's no place where you'd have to use Latin to accomplish a very normal everyday goal, choosing to use Latin to do normal everyday things in is quite a marked choice. Like, why would you do that? Except because you love the language, because it's beautiful, because you want to learn the language, because you want to teach the language. Like all of those things lead us to want correctness in our speech, because if we didn't mind so much about whether we were speaking good Latin or bad Latin, we could have just spoken another language. Like, why choose the hard one? Why be so hard on yourself and try to speak it?
Right. Like, your goal is not communication. Otherwise, you choose Mandarin or French or Spanish, right?
Yeah, you're making a statement by doing something in Latin. You're doing something beautiful, or you're doing something educational. In my opinion, I'm sure there's lots of Latinists who are right now angrily commenting and like, no, you can use Latin very in conversation and casually, and like, absolutely. I'm saying you can do that. It's just, would you choose Latin over an easier to learn modern language to do that? Yeah.
Right.
I do actually play Dungeons and Dragons in Latin.
Nice.
Yeah. And I'm making mistakes left, right, and center as I play that. Obviously, it's a conversational type format. But you were asking, I keep getting sidetracked. You were asking, how did I go from being fairly, like, not having a lot of output in my experience to talking, especially from that kind of mode where it was very like hyper-correcting, you only produce a small amount, and it has to be absolutely pristine, versus talking and being able to have a hour-long conversation in Latin with whatever topic that you want. That was a conscious effort that I made around 2021, 2022, and I've kind of continued to do it on and off, but when I got pregnant and had a child, it was a lot harder to have time to interact. But it was, I made a conscious effort to have conversations in Latin with people, and that was scary at first, but it got easier the more I did it. So it was, I don't know how to explain it other than you've got to step out and try. If you've learned a language for long enough that you can read high-level texts in it, you're well ready to try to activate it in conversation. And it was, if it's something that you love, if the language is one that you find personally very enjoyable, then you should lean into that and make all the uses of the language as enjoyable to you as possible. So things like talking on a message board. There was a Latin Discord, there still is, a Latin Discord where you can type in Latin. Obviously, that's a lot more of a short format that it takes the pressure off versus having to produce something polished and have people critique you for your use of the language. You can also get feedback in that forum, in that discussion board, on whether you're using the language right, but it's so much less, it's lower stakes than having written something major. So talking in Latin on the Reddit and on the Discord, speaking in Latin speaking groups, there's Zoom chats online. I had even lined up some italki tutors at some point, and spoke Latin with them. There was also, I think there's a huge value in arranging in-person groups to meet with and talk in Latin in your language, whichever language it is, because language is so much more natural when you're right there with the person. It's so much easier to just interact with people when there isn't a screen between you.
Yeah, body language and everything that you're only aware of 100%. I mean, when you're live with someone, right?
Yeah. And so I did organize some Latin-speaking board game groups.
Nice.
The first time I did a Latin-speaking event in my local area, actually, it was still COVID times, so I had to do that online. And I'd lined up a bunch of speaking games and speaking activities that we kind of did. And then did some more speaking practice in person over board games when Melbourne kind of opened up again. And yeah, it's like, don't overthink it. Get a bunch of people together who are all interested in using this language and talk it and speak in that language, have a board game, have fun, bring chips, whatever it is to kind of break the ice. And I've spoken to some really interesting people in Latin as a result. Had a Catholic priest over at my house the last time, and it was just really fun, really fun. Yeah, meet new people and talk to them.
That's awesome. Yeah. And did you do something in between? Meaning, like when you started the process of output, did you just start talking in those groups right away, or did you talk to yourself first to try to see how you were doing, or how was it?
I maybe talked to myself for about an hour before getting really sick of it.
Okay.
I mean, and not like a straight hour, but maybe like sessions, and like,
right.
nah, I'm really sick of doing this. Yeah. It was recommended to me that I use Familia Romana, like read aloud the story, then answer the questions at the end of it, which are very sort of comprehension questions at the end, like what does Marcus do? Is so and so a son of so and so or not? Like things like that, very straight up comprehension questions, and just answer those in Latin aloud off the cuff. And so I did that, but I got very sick of it. It was kind of like, I'm not talking to anyone.
Right.
There's no point in this.
They want to talk to another human being, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think because I'd been teaching Latin, I'd had a lot of practice just simply reading aloud in the target language without meaning to practice output, just reading things aloud because I want students to process it as we're reading it together. So I had no problem enunciating things. And I think if you had any language where you hadn't been doing a lot of reading aloud up to that point, you might need to check to see if when you see something, can you easily just rattle off the sentence that you see written down in front of you? Or if someone says a sentence to you, can you say some of the sentence back quite quickly? If you have that skill, then it's easier to kind of fall back on certain chunks that you know, like the sort of saying hello sequence, I think is a fairly useful thing to have very quickly, like able to say very quickly, like Salve, eu sou Magistra Hurt, Utwales. That is like, hello, my name's I'm Magistra Hurt, I'm Mrs. Hurt, how are you? Okay. And like, bene me habo, I'm well. Just like memorize, or I mean, I guess it is like memorize these, like the patterns where it's like I'm saying the greeting kind of thing. But then beyond that, there are certain like conversational turn phrases that you hear from people when you have a conversation, and you can kind of put that in the back of your mind, like, people like to say that as a kind of conversation filler words, like the things like let me think. I'm just only thinking of the comprehensible input teachers who have got a list of conversational reaction words like rem mirabilem, which is like, oh, what a wonderful thing, what a strange thing, or thing like that. Now I can't think of any other examples right now. I blame the baby.
I know. Yeah, but I know what you mean. It is we even do that subconsciously, like just by listening to the language, we keep listening to the same structures when introducing yourself to someone, so you repeat them, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like I'm just thinking with English, for example, if you learn English in a traditional environment, I don't know, asking things like "How you doing?" for example. You wouldn't think of those sentences yourself. You just leave it.
Yeah, you're not composing the sentence. You're just saying the chunk.
Yeah, but what I mean is by listening to people actually introduce themselves. Like, hey, hi, my name's. How you doing? Things like that.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That's why. So you keep repeating them because you've listened to them many times first. But then the process of actually using them yourself is also going to help you retrieve them more easily and become more fluent. That's the output practice part that we were talking about, right?
Yeah. One thing I did do a lot in that time when I was training output was listening to conversations in Latin that were recorded. So people were using a lot of these conversational words, these turns of phrases that they kind of sprinkle in there. And when they did that, I would repeat that particular phrase. So I wasn't necessarily repeating the content of what they were saying, just the little words like certe, like certainly, mm-hmm. Things that people were saying as like nodding in agreement or whatever. And so that kind of fills out what you can say in a sentence, in a conversation that makes the conversation less awkward.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And is that also because, is that the reason why you started your YouTube channel then? started writing the books?
Oh, I started my YouTube channel partly because it was in the middle of lockdown and I really wanted to make videos for my students. And it was, might as well make them for everyone if I'm going to make them for my students. So it was just a really good an arrangement where I could kind of give to Latin learners everywhere as well as to my own students. And I just enjoy creating as well. The video format is quite fun to work with. And and using videos in class is a nice way to break up the monotony of everyone quiet, listen to the teacher versus like, okay, I'm going to put on a video. It's going to have visuals as well as Latin input. And that is very, very valuable.
And it's still their teacher, right? Because it were your videos.
Yeah, that's true. I made a bunch of videos initially for my students and kind of also enjoy making videos for people in general. And the books, I started getting into books because I was thinking about what is the most valuable resource that you can make. It's things that are going to last, right? Because videos on YouTube, they pop up in recommendations and then you click on it and then 5 minutes later you're done watching it, you're clicking on to something else. And there's only so much input that you can get from a video. There's only so much impact that you can make with content like that. I was also thinking I want to make more videos, but it starts to become hard to make longer videos on with really good input and not be violating copyright. For example, like reading aloud a textbook. Going off, my strategy with teaching in person is to start with a textbook, elaborate on it. Mm-hmm. I can't do that on a video format. That's copyright infringement. Okay. Some people do, but they're treading a dangerous line there. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, I need to create my own original content then. And writing a book is a really good way to do that. It gives you the chance to write something and get it edited and have it really nicely packaged. It's in a format on paper where it will survive lots of different algorithm changes in the web space. It's not going to suddenly disappear if the YouTube platform disappears, which undoubtedly it will. Like all of I'm just thinking back about all the websites I used to go to when I was a kid and how few of them exist today, even though they seemed so important back then. Whereas books, we're still reading from books from there are certain Latin learning books that are 100 years old now in the public domain that people still dig up and learn from, like Ricci's Fabulae Faciles. That keeps coming back up. It's one of the more commonly purchased books now, simply because it's useful and because it's public domain, you can get it fairly cheaply and in various formats. But why aren't we writing more like that? Why aren't we making more longer stories, longer formats where it's useful input? And so I wrote The Lover's Curse, which is a tiered reader of the book 4 of the Aeneid, the book where it talks about Queen Dido. I call her Dido. Pretty much every English speaker should be calling her Dido, but I learnt Dido and I'm stuck with it. Queen Dido, she tragically falls in love with the hero Aeneas, and it's because of the meddling of the gods. But she can't shake this infatuation, and it has tragic consequences for her. And it's so this is part of the ancient epic poem, which is written by Virgil. It was written by Virgil 2,000 years ago, and Virgil as a poet is at times quite difficult to understand, especially for a learner. He uses very elevated speech. He's very descriptive, richly descriptive. He will be very particular about what kind of words he uses, partly because it needs to fit in the rhythm of poetry, and partly, I think, because it's more vivid to describe similes in very exacting detail. Like, it's not just the deer in a simile is running through a forest, is running through the woods of Crete, near the Mount Dictae, and there's these learned references to geography, to mythology, to gods, and to places and peoples that certain ethnic groups that most people have not heard of and probably don't exist anymore. Yeah. There's so much in this poetry which is cryptic to a first-time reader. And I want people to enjoy this because it's a very well-written poem. Like, the more I read Virgil and the Aeneid especially, the more I find beautiful about it. So I wrote this tiered reader initially because we were studying it with my students in year 11 and 12. And this was a way to introduce them to the poem. And then I finished up all the other parts that we didn't cover in that course with my year 11s and 12s, and made it a full book 4 resource. So it was, I said tiered reader, and that means I have written an easy version, a medium version, a harder version, and then the original text, which is the hardest. In certain comprehensible input circles, it would be called embedded readings. Mm-hmm. Sorry again for the groaning. No worries. Embedded readings, which is the same thing. It's just a different word for the same thing. Tiered readings, embedded readings. And I found that there was not a whole lot of published Latin resources in the format of tiered readings, even though it's very, very useful in class to be able to read an easy version of the text that you're reading, understand that, and then everyone move up. Like, it makes it so much easier for everyone in the class, including the lower students, to get that first rung of the ladder access to the text. And then everyone gets pulled up all the way up to the final version, reading the poetry. Yeah, reading poetry, where it actually is a focus on understanding the poetry, and it's so much nicer than pulling the sentence apart, in the sense where you read the sentence, find the main verb, find the subject and the object, all these adjectives. So the adjectives are nowhere near the nouns because it's poetry and blah, blah, blah. It's so much nicer to approach it already kind of having an idea what it's about to say, and things all fitting together, and being able to compare the poetic words of Virgil to my very almost casual rendering in the earliest tier. So, like, why does Virgil phrase it this way? Why does he include those details? That kind of discussion usually yields a lot of fruit for my students, especially as they get into their final exam and they need to talk about Virgil's use of language and things like that.
Awesome.
So,
awesome.
Yeah, it was. That's the first book that I've published, is The Lover's Curse. I don't have a physical copy of it right now because I gave my last one away to I lent it to a friend and she still got it. And I sold all my other physical copies that I had ordered.
Okay.
So I don't have any exemplar in front of me, but I can put the link in the description. It's also, I have a free copy for anyone who wants to sign up to my Latin e-newsletter. It's an email that I occasionally send. I haven't been sending very many recently because I've been looking after this little one. Yeah. But I will continue sending emails about my Latin projects. And the link is, if you go to foundinantiquity.com/The Lover's Curse, with no spaces or anything, then there's a place to sign up for my newsletter, and you get a free ebook copy of the whole book, The Lover's Curse. So that's a free whole book is awesome. What you get.
Cool. Yeah, we'll leave links to everything down below, like your YouTube channel, your book, website, everything that you want me to link to.
Yeah. And what I'm working on right now is the same format, but for an author called, in Latin, Phaedrus. And I say Phaedrus in English, but I think English speakers are supposed to say Phaedrus. But again, it's one of those Latin words where I've mangled the English pronunciation because I know the Latin pronunciation. So I'm just going to say Phaedrus, and everyone's going to be cringing and say, no, it's Phaedrus. Phaedrus wrote fables, and these fables involve animal main characters. And surprisingly, because I've always seen Aesop and Phaedrus as like it's kind of medieval stuff, I always thought that they were medieval because all the illustrations that came with these seem to be medieval or later Renaissance, that kind of thing. He is actually, Aesop was a contemporary of Sappho in ancient Greece, like the 5th century BC kind of timeline. And Phaedrus, he was this freedman of Augustus. So he is just straight after the Augustan period, and still pretty much writing in Golden Age Latin, although under the Emperor Tiberius, sort of like debatably he's in the Silver Age, but his writing style is pretty much Golden Age Latin. And that is very valuable because the focus of most Latin courses is Golden Age Latin. and that kind of middle of the empire period. I mean, sort of like that changeover between Republic and Empire and early Empire period of Roman history. So Phaedrus is writing at a time when there are emperors or an emperor, Tiberius, and various court intrigues happening around him. He was in the imperial court as a freedman. We don't know a whole lot about him, except that maybe he might have been a paidagogos, which is a slave used to educate the children.
Okay.
Tutor, I guess, is a word. Paidagogos, though, literally means one who accompanies the kid, one who accompanies the child to school, a slave charged with carrying his books and backpack and things like that, and preventing the kid from being attacked in the street. Supervisor. But yeah, he ended up like that role of a slave ended up being a tutor of sorts. So he was Greek speaking by birth, but learnt Latin to such a degree that he can be a really good Latin poet. So must have had early exposure to Latin or been just very good at picking up. Yeah, I don't know how such a native Greek speaker became such a great Latin poet. He's got a very natural use of the language in his writings. And he uses a form of poetic meter, iambic, what do you call it? It's the iambic trimeter, the same format as what is used in Roman comedy. It's the most natural meter for Latin as a language. It's like the language of Latin kind of most naturally fits into iambic trimeter compared to being more constrained by other kinds of meters, where it's more of a challenge to write in that meter. So Phaedrus's fables are very comprehensible for ancient texts because they contain animal main characters. They're fairly straightforward, narrative focused. You can kind of get the point of it very quickly because they're short, bite size, and the meter itself is quite flexible and quite suited to the Latin language itself. And it's not like he's being extremely elevated in his speech the way Virgil is like elevating his speech.
So you're adapting those in your new book, but they don't need as much adapting because of how comprehensible they are, as opposed to the first one. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So Phaedrus's fables are a lot more accessible already, and I can make them more accessible. Okay. So I'd say that this work that I'm working on is more for year 11, and the other one's more for year 12. But you could use them at either year level if you wanted to. It's you could even sprinkle in a fable here or there before students have finished learning all the grammar, and just like give them more support. It's something which, because fables are so small and bite-sized, you can just have them added to a program, and now you've got some real Latin, like a full Latin poem in there that students can read. Yeah, that's what kind of makes me feel very excited. It's like being able to incorporate real, authentic texts and have them be comprehensible and enjoyable.
Right. Yeah. Oh, awesome. All right. So I'm also curious, before we wrap things up, like, will you be interested in learning a mother language in the near future, or?
I have been interested in learning modern languages. I haven't been interested in learning them particularly well, but in 2022, I started learning Italian. Okay. And that was really fun. Makes sense. Yeah. Italian, there's so many movies and TV shows in Italian. I've watched many, many seasons of Pokemon in Italian, and I feel like Italian's the most fun language I've ever had to learn, partly because I knew a lot of Latin. It seemed like there was quite easy fit. I can't really talk much in Italian because I haven't practiced output. I will trip over every word that I say in Italian if I try to talk in it. But if I were to train myself in output, I'm sure I'd be able to do it. I just haven't been bothered to do so. But yeah, I can understand a lot of input in Italian. I could bring up an academic journal article in Italian and get every main point that author is saying in every paragraph. I'd be able to work out what it's saying. I started learning modern Greek in 2022. 2023. The next year I started modern Greek. And that's when I stumbled on your channel. And there were those comprehensible input videos in the TPRS style.
Right.
That was so valuable.
I did a little experiment with it, yeah.
Yeah, there was like Giannis, the crocodile, and the crazy stories with him. And that was really, really good to listen to. So I learned some modern Greek, and I was thinking, if I just do the same thing in modern Greek as what I did last year in Italian, I'll be able to read, I don't know, academic journal articles in modern Greek by the end of the year.
That's always here, right?
It didn't happen that way, no.
Yeah.
Modern Greek was so much harder than Italian. And maybe because I was lazier, I was like, oh, I got this. Language learning is easy. I don't have to watch as much as I thought I did, and then just didn't learn as much. Whereas with Italian, I was a little bit more strict on, I have to watch at least one episode of Pokemon every day and like things like that. With modern Greek, I'm still occasionally looking at watching things in it, and I can comprehend kids shows like Sonic Prime. That was a really good show. I was watching in modern Greek on Netflix. And so one day in the distant future, I'll learn modern Hebrew and brush up my biblical Hebrew as well. But yeah, those are the languages that I've been learning. And if it ever comes to be, if there is ever resources in Aboriginal language of this area, Wallarwarung, I would love to learn that, but currently there is zero, or not zero, but like there's only a vocab list as a learning resource for Wallarwarung in the local area, Indigenous Aboriginal language. Like Aboriginal languages of Australia are like Latin. They have cases and things.
Oh.
Yeah, they're extremely complicated is what impression that I get from like what people have studied of the grammars of these languages. But there's something so appealing about learning a language that was spoken here. Because all of these languages that I've listed so far, like Mandarin Chinese to Biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew, like all of them are out there. It's spoken in a foreign country. They
right.
And then this is the only sort of language that actually links me to the land that I'm living on. So
nice.
I think there's something to that.
Yeah, you're just gonna meet someone and have them create content in that language, right?
Yeah,
and great stories, or of course it is.
They're very very protective of their language and of trying to make it authentically from the people who identify as Indigenous and of that group, and who So I have met with some representatives of the local Indigenous groups, and they've been fairly cautious about like don't go and like make stuff and be like, I'm a teacher of Wallarwarung now. Like it was kind of you got to be careful, step back and let the make sure that it's from an Indigenous voice perspective that things get made. And like, fair enough, I don't identify as an Indigenous, so.
Right. No, I understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're trying to protect the language, I was going to say, but if you wanted to live on, you need to create content around it. Or I mean, anyway,
Yeah,
I'm not going to get into that.
I'm hoping that they do produce certain things so that I can at least, like, if they make a kids book in Wadawarung, I'm so going to buy that and read it cover to cover.
Yeah,
Cover to short cover, whatever they produce, anything that they produce, I'm going to try to learn. And yeah, it's really, there's so many languages in Australia which are absolutely struggling because of the situation that they're in with the destruction of Indigenous cultures by the forces of colonization and the way that things panned out. None of this happened by accident either, but there's a whole lot of politics to go into there.
That's another topic.
Sure. Yeah. But it's so interesting. Like, pursuing language learning makes you want to learn about the people who spoke that language as well. And there's always something good to learn more about human beings through learning the language that they've or being interested in learning the language that they've spoken. So I don't think I've ever been motivated to really learn about Indigenous history until I was looking into the Indigenous language, and that just it's such a there's so much to learn about this history of what got us here, and of people who are currently in our society as well. Obviously, it's not like they were all ancient peoples. They're still here.
Yeah, that's a good final message. I love it. Okay. So it's been a pleasure, Carla. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great. I'm very surprised that Ezekiel has stayed this calm for this.
Yeah. It's, we're talking languages. He's calm. He likes it.
Yeah, he does like it when he hears people talking. It's calming to him.
All right. So thank you. Like I said, and hope everyone enjoyed it. A different perspective, like from quote unquote dead language today.
Yeah.
But trying to, keep it alive.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm hoping to make more stuff in ancient Greek too, because I spoke mostly about Latin because I've been mostly making things in Latin recently, but ancient Greek, oh my goodness, it needs more resources. Latin has got this glut of resources, and then ancient Greek is like, have a grammar textbook, have another grammar textbook.
Yeah, we need content for all languages, as much as possible and as compelling as possible, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Compelling, comprehensible input that is nicely made, accurate, helping you learn the language. That's what I'd love to make.
Awesome. All right. So, thank you, Carla, again. And, I'll have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for watching this interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful for you. And if you want to know more about language learning, language acquisition, what's the best way to learn a language, ideas for language learning, the best resources at different levels. Here, you can find the whole playlist with all the interviews I've done so far with different researchers, teachers, polyglots, and so on. And finally, right here, you smash this guy right in the face to subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.